again for welcoming me. I have to admit that as I travel with Jews for Jesus, I'm not always so warmly welcome. Sometimes it's controversial, and I mentioned that before, because interestingly enough, today people think being a Jew for Jesus is an oxymoron. You can't be Jewish and believe in Jesus. It's a contradiction in terms as far as some people are concerned. Because once you become a believer in Jesus, you're no longer Jewish. But think about it this way. Jesus was Jewish, right? When he became Messiah, he didn't stop being Jewish. The followers that basically became the first church, they were Jews from the first century. They believed they discovered the Jewish Messiah. For them, it wasn't antithetical to their own heritage as Jews. In fact, it was completing their Jewishness. It was fulfilling so much of what they had been waiting for in the law, the writings, and the prophets, as all of those pointed to Messiah. So for them, they understood what their belief was to be fully in context and consistent with what they had been expecting and waiting for as Jewish people. So today, those of us who are Jewish, who have come to know the Lord, who have come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, we like to be able to talk about that in Jews for Jesus with Jewish people that don't know Jesus. Now, less than 1% is the estimate of Jews believe in Jesus today. So, by and large, this is an unreached group of people. It's a group that does not know Jesus as Messiah. And that's why it's so strange and often contradictory. So, our organization seeks to really reach out and talk to Jewish people and really start a conversation. Not so much about a denomination or about Jews for Jesus or even about the church, although Jews for Jesus does come up in conversation as that's the name of our organization. But really we want to talk about Jesus. We want to discuss him with our Jewish people and really ask, could it be that this is the promised Messiah?
Leave it there a minute. Yeah.
So our work is focused throughout the United States in major metropolitan areas where there are significant Jewish pockets, Jewish communities. Currently we have branches in the United States in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago. We have an outpost in Phoenix. We have a branch in Florida. We have a branch in Chicago. We have a branch in New York City. And I think I got all of them. And there's also some international works as well. In Israel, is a fast-growing ministry. New York is our largest work in the United States. We have around 17 staff. We have a camp program for children and youth. We do a lot of ministry to that age group. We have college and kind of career age ministry, so do a lot of campus stuff. We also have ministry to people that are in adult years and older, and so our ministry really tries to relate and contextualize this hope that we have to our people and provide opportunities for them to intersect with the gospel. One of the things I like to say in churches is, when was the last time you had a Jewish person knock on the door and say, what must I do to be saved? Okay? I wish it happened every day. It doesn't happen as frequently as we'd like. But that being said, we want to create those intersection points so that the community can say, hang on a minute. Could it be that maybe we've overlooked something or that we haven't really considered these messianic claims? I gave an example earlier that I met with an older Jewish man in Manhattan some years ago. And we sat down and we opened up the scriptures. He was willing to do that. Even though he said he was a skeptic and he said he didn't necessarily believe that I was on the right path at all, he was willing to open up the Hebrew Bible, and we talked about some different passages. And one day, specifically, we opened up to Isaiah 53, and he read it through in Hebrew. He started laughing. And when I asked him why he was laughing, he said, because this is a complete and accurate description of Jesus, who you've been saying is the Messiah all along, and I can't believe this is in the Old Testament. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? He said, well, I made a promise to my father. I vowed to him that I wouldn't become a believer in Jesus, a Christian. So I really can't do anything about it. But there are lots of people like that out there that when they are able to talk about it and open up the Bible and think about it for themselves, they are impressed and they are actually interacting with a very rich kind of portion of Scripture that points to Messiah. Now, I also want to say on the flip side, there are lots of people who really don't care about the Bible. So if all you do is talk about the Bible, they go, Bible, okay, that's not really relating to me. One of my professors at NYU, I'm actually in a program there part-time, she said to me, look, I'm Jewish, Jesus schmeezus. I don't care about Jesus. I have no interest in, this, but she said, I'm interested in your organization. And she taught marketing at NYU. And she said, I see your group on the streets and I'm curious, how do people in the Jewish community interact with you? And we got into a really good conversation about it that opened up some good dialogue that helped me really reflect on our perception within the Jewish community in New York. But that's a separate issue. So I thought I could open it up in a few minutes and just give you guys a few minutes to ask questions around maybe things that have come up in your own life or things that you want to know about. I do want to mention that there are a few things that I've brought along with me that may help you. There's one flyer like this that's for witnessing to Jewish people. A few pointers in here. I know you might have, how many people have Jewish friends? See, I love being in the New York area. When I'm in Arkansas, there's like nobody that raises their hand. But here everybody knows somebody that's Jewish. So I want to be able to be a resource to you. If there's something that I can do to help you in your witness and even just to understand your Jewish friends, I'd love to be able to do that. We have some evangelistic literature. These are from Jews for Jesus, some of the things that we've given out over the years just to help clarify what our message is and what it is that we're talking about. This is a copy of our newsletter, which is available. And this actually is for you to fill in if you have a minute and you want to know more about how to pray specifically for the Jewish community. Somebody prayed for me for many years, and my heart was receptive to the gospel when I began to read the New Testament, really for the first time in my life. And I believe prayer is a powerful resource to us, just as we prayed in the service. You can also pray for your Jewish friends and ask that God would give them eyes to see and ears to hear. And that even if they're not interested in the Bible, maybe something in your story may be compelling to them. Why do you love God? The God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the same God that Jewish people pray to. Why is it that you love Him so much? How did that happen? It's often fascinating to Jewish people to understand how fervent you are in your faith and how much you really do care and love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So those are areas that we can be examples. So I want to open it up now for questions. I think you had your hand up, so I'll answer yours first.
Sure. In the 21st century, what did Jews perceive as the Messiah? As a conquering king, as they did 2,000 years ago when Jesus walked the earth? Or what is their vision of the Messiah? How do they see the Messiah?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Now, just to kind of give a small kind of contextual background to this, the idea of Messiah actually is very different from one denomination of Jews to the other. So from within a very sort of Reformed Jewish movement, they might say Messiah, it's an interesting concept. We might be Messiah, right? We could bring the Messianic age to the world by doing good things. And then you've got on the other end of the extreme, you've got the ultra-Orthodox, which would probably be a lot more literal in their interpretation of the text. They'd say he has to be a man, he is not God, and that he would come and he would basically be on the throne of David, and when we see him come, we're going to be seeing swords beaten into plowshares, and we're going to see world peace. And so that's why they believe Jesus would be disqualified, because of the fact that he didn't fulfill those particular prophecies. And yet at the same time, within Orthodox Judaism, there is a concept that there would be two Messiahs. One that's Messiah ben Yosef, which is the suffering servant, and one Messiah ben David, which is the reigning king. So they identify these two conflicting sort of pictures of Messiah in the text, one that would be a king and one that would suffer. So that's a little bit of a snapshot. And then a lot of Jews just go, Messiah, what's that? So a little bit of variety.
No, I'm glad Kevin brought that up, because a lot of time in our Bible studies and discussions, we do wonder what about Jesus trips up the Jewish vision of Messiah. Yeah. Typically, we kind of think that it's his humility, it's his, he died on a cross. What kind of Messiah dies on a cross? Those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's this book, I think it's called What the Rabbanim Say About Jesus, or something like that, or say about Messiah. And it's written by a guy named Doug Pyle, but all he does is take Talmudic references, and he compiles them together about what they say about Messiah. And the interesting thing is, there are some surprising rabbinic texts that say things very similar, that the Messiah would be cut off, that he would suffer, even that he would be raised again. There are some very interesting rabbinic passages that not all Jews really know about, and they don't all agree, because it's not like, rabbis argue with each other, so there's lots of different approaches. But there are some that would make some cases about Messiah that are very interesting. Any other questions? Yes. Oh, and then you're next.
Couple of questions. I'm trying to wrap myself around this idea of what you described as an oxymoron. Correctly, I guess. Would it be correct to say that you were genetically, ethnically Jewish, but actually a Christian also?
I am. I'm a Christian in my faith. I'd also, one of the things that's very interesting is I don't represent mainline Judaism, and I don't want to make a case that I do. But at the same time, it's a very Jewish faith when you get down to it. That the very roots of what we believe as believers in Jesus and followers of this whole thing, there was never, I've had people come up to me on the street and go, Jesus was a good Jew until he converted to Catholicism. That never happened. And, at the same time, we do believe something different than our rabbinic, the Orthodox or the other denominations that are out there, and we don't want to mislead. But we also still continue to identify as Jews. I still observe Jewish customs and holidays, not in the way that an Orthodox Jew would, but, in a lot of areas I like to bring that into my expression of worship, even to identify, because I believe they point to Messiah in a very profound way. They point to God's promises in a really cool way. So that's kind of my kind of short, I guess, elevator pitch when I'm talking to people about what it means to be a Jew for Jesus. Kind of thing. So I think there was one question back there, and then.
So how do you reach out to Jews without offending them? So I went to a college that had a very strong, prominent Jewish community, and so we would go and occasionally knock on doors to invite people to Bible studies or whatever, and they would be like, I'm Jewish, and slam the door and be very standoffish and sort of angry as if we were offending them by talking about Jesus. So how do you approach that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's an incredibly difficult thing to navigate. There's not like a one-size-fits-all, but I would say, and I gave, earlier I gave a few pointers. One is really being a blessing to the people around you. I don't really think arguing does a lot of good usually, Typically speaking, you kind of create more sides to things when you start arguing it out. Not that you can't be just in disagreement with somebody. In fact, Jewish people often share their opinions, and they don't have a problem sharing it. So they might, I'm on the street sometimes doing something, or in my vehicle it says Jews for Jesus occasionally. I've had people just be like, you're an idiot, or, I disagree, and I'll tell you why. And I'm like, I'm sure you will. And they do, and there's something in some ways transparent about that. So you almost always know where a person stands. But at the same time, I would recommend when you have interactions with people, I would shy away from sharing what you believe. You're not Jewish. You don't have to be Jewish. You can say, I love Jesus. Let me tell you why. And they might not feel like hearing it, or they might not have invited that, in which case be sensitive to that. But I really like asking questions. I really find that we've gotten so accustomed to telling people what it is that we believe, and just sort of projectile, missions. It's like we're just shooting stuff out, but we're not always listening. Are those the questions people are asking? I'm answering why I think Jesus is the Messiah. Well, maybe he doesn't even believe in Messiah or God. I'm telling him how the scriptures point to this, and maybe he doesn't believe in the scriptures. I'm pointing to, so often listening, you can kind of find a way underneath, and asking questions. So one of the things I like to do is say, what does it mean to you to be Jewish? I mean, I'm curious as a Christian. What does that mean? You know, obviously there's this long history, but for you today, just to kind of get to know a person, and I think it's reciprocated. You know, often a person might say to you, well, what does it mean to you? You know, but to be able to kind of unpack that, and if a person disagrees, you know, I say, okay, I understand that. I like to challenge people sometimes and say, have you ever considered reading the New Testament for yourself? You know, you'd be surprised what you find in there. You know, I've had Jewish people say to me, well, it's just copying the Old Testament. It's really Jewish sounding. And I'm like, well, they were Jews for the most part in the first century that put it together. So we should expect that. First century Jewish writing sounded very much like this. So that's maybe one approach. And then obviously a lot of prayer, you know, for people and praying that God would open their hearts. And also, I mean, look, sharing the gospel, I think is a powerful thing. I encourage people to say, you know, just go for it once in a while in a sensitive way. And obviously, if you're getting cues where a person's listening and they're open, don't hesitate. You know, ask them if they'd be open to you know, get a New Testament or get something from somebody. Sometimes they'll say yes. You know, ask. It's a big thing. A lot of times we don't ask because we're too afraid to. I've had people in the streets just ask somebody, hey, do you want to receive Jesus right now? You seem like you're really, you know, and they go, yeah. Now, you could have not asked, and they walked away, and they're like, what do I do with this? Now I believe, you know, I believe. So, I think that's one way to approach the issue. I think this gentleman had a question in here.
Yeah, how much is the, well, we refer to the Hebrew Testament, which it actually is, as the Old Testament. But how much of your time is devoted to the New Testament? Is that the centerpiece?
You mean for me personally?
Yeah, or for the group?
I think it's kind of similar to what you do here. We equally teach from both. Often we have our own Friday, so we have our own Friday gathering for Jewish people in Manhattan that get together, and we'll do, you know, there's something called the Parshat HaShavua. It's like the weekly portion of the Torah reading. And so the synagogues go through and they read through the Torah every year. So one of the things we like to do is on our Friday night thing, we do a short drash, a short like piece on the Torah portion, and we'll incorporate New Testament kind of teaching into really what the heart of that sort of issue is that's coming out of the Torah, because we have a lot of Jewish people that attend, you know, our event. So that's one of the approaches. But we do from both. Yeah. I think you had a question.
I have a question. From my understanding of the Old Testament, the Jews feared God, had to obey the laws, etc. We're taught to have a loving, personal relationship with God and be in touch with God every day and talk to God. How do modern-day Jews view God, and what is their personal relationship with Him?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think Christians emphasize that a lot more. You know, they say Christianity is a religion of creed, Judaism is deed. That's like one of these things that you hear occasionally. Like, they don't emphasize dogma as much. They don't emphasize, like, you know, particular even beliefs. There's the Shema, which is from Deuteronomy 6, like, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and, you know, kind of go through and tell that. But a lot of times they don't have like a particular passage or a particular like set of beliefs that everybody has to believe. So when it comes to relationship with God, it's kind of individual and it's not necessarily as emphasized. There are mystical forms of Judaism that are much more spiritual, but those are more ultra-Orthodox or like New Agey. They're not really your typical Jewish expressions. So I think it's definitely, that's definitely not played up your own personal relationship with God. I mean, your prayers are written in a siddur, in a book. So every day in the morning you're saying your prayers, but you're really not just praying yourself. You have beautifully written prayers that you just sort of say every morning. So you can either do that. There's a word, a Hebrew word called kavanah. Kavanah means intent. So you can do with kavanah, or you can just say the words. And from a Jewish perspective, they wouldn't necessarily disqualify just saying the words. You know, they'd say, well, you know, occasionally I've had in the city, there'll be ultra-Orthodox Jews that are getting people to wrap tefillin, you know, where they wrap the the leather phylacteries on their arms, or say these prayers for Hanukkah or whatever, I'll say, what if I don't believe it? And they go, doesn't matter, you're doing it. And if you do it, that's what God has commanded us to do. So they emphasize doing a lot more, which is why they have a hard time with the Christian belief, like, oh, so a person could just be evil their whole life, and then they can ask for forgiveness, like on their deathbed. And they have like a huge problem with that. That's like, that idea of grace is like really a difficult thing.
The other point to the other half of Evelyn's question is, if you just look at Old Testament, New Testament, Old Testament worship of God was corporate, with the exception of the Psalms, but it was the people. Jesus comes, and that's where it starts to get more, like we've talked about, more personal. It's one-on-one. So there's a built-in kind of structural difference.
Although the interesting thing is when I tell Jewish people, I go, David said, the Lord is my shepherd. He leads me by still waters. He walks with me. He talked in very intimate terms,
True.
which, you know, which is kind of an interesting thing, because most rabbis, they've sort of said, well, God is so holy that we can't, he's so other that we can't really know him. And so really, man has moved further and further down and away outside of, you know, sort of God. Can't talk about him in direct attributes, you know. And so you're right, you know, there is, New Testament really places emphasis back into that, even though I think, you know, throughout the ages there were individuals that had a heart for God, like what you were talking about today. So, yeah, thank you for the question.
I had two. One was, what kind of faith do people that are Jews that become Christians, do they, besides maybe meeting on a Friday night with your group, do they incorporate themselves into different Christian faiths? And then the other thing is, I mean, I was always told when I grew up, because I had Jewish friends, but maybe told by my parents, that the big difference was in Jews and Christians that Jews didn't believe in, you know, life after death. But yet, sometimes I've worked with Jewish people that will talk about like a heaven. So I was just kind of wondering about that.
Yeah. So the issue of life after death, the concept isn't quite as developed as it would be in the New Testament. But they do refer back to Daniel, where it talks about the resurrection of the dead. And the resurrection of the dead is actually something that all Orthodox Jews are supposed to believe. So there's an implication there that, you know, and the Bible talks about, you know, they slept with the fathers, or, you know, it talks about death in these sort of ambiguous kind of ways. And so I think there is a sense that there is an afterlife if you're going more in that direction. If you're more like Reformed Jews, they might kind of go, maybe, you know, that like reincarnation isn't out of the question. Like there's a lot of things that they could kind of take and grab and believe if they wanted to when it comes to the afterlife. But, you know, it's interesting because you always see when there's a funeral, suddenly the afterlife is a lot more emphasized, right? So it really depends what kind of conversation you're having, but it is not something that's talked about as widely. You know, they wouldn't say, do these mitzvahs and you will inherit eternal life. They don't really say that outright, but I think they think by doing the mitzvahs, by keeping the commandments, they're pleasing God ultimately, and that's something that they need to do for what's to come, whatever that means. And the first part of your question about Messianic Jews, or Jews that believe in Jesus and where they attend, there's a variety of places. I actually attend a church in the city. A lot of my staff do. Well, actually, all of my staff attend churches at this point. There are a few Messianic congregations, which are kind of like churches, but they worship in a Jewish style, Messianic style of worship. They might observe more of the holidays and stuff, and there might be more Jewish people like in leadership. And there are a couple of those congregations, and we're friends with some of them. It's like any denomination, they're very different. So it's not like there's this one form of Messianic Judaism. But one of the things, and this is a little different about Jews for Jesus, there are some groups that are Messianic Jews that would want to be a bit separate for their witness to Israel. So they want to be separate and not perceived primarily as from within the church. They would want to be primary identity is embedded within the Jewish community as a remnant of Israel. And that's kind of how they view their position. That being said, we believe that the body of Christ is diverse and it's powerful, and to sort of take ourselves as Jews completely out of the rest of the church, it will be harmful. So we like to be part of, because we believe that brings a unique tradition and a unique expression into the church as well. My church has had me do Passover Seder's at our church a couple times, so I think that's beneficial. So I wouldn't say there's only one size fits all, but that's kind of a description of what we do.
Good questions. More? Others?
How much do you value some of the other teachings, like the Kabbalah? Is that off limits, or?
So the Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism, and the Zohar is a book that it's kind of like a very mystical book written, I think, in the Middle Ages. And to be honest, we might examine as an interesting point of connection with Jewish thinking and thought. But in general, we wouldn't necessarily go back to that and say it's authoritative. It would just be part of the Jewish kind of, there's a lot of extra biblical writings. Some of them are more useful than others. There are some interesting things in the Kabbalistic writings that some Jews have said have been influenced by Christian thought, such as the idea of God in almost like a triune or three persons perspective within Kabbalistic writings. It is kind of interesting how it's written. Not quite sure where they got that. Could be some type of Christian theologian. But nevertheless, it's not something that I would go to on a regular basis, but I have looked at it here and there. Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, I have so many good friends of Jewish persuasion and the customers too, and they'll ask me a little bit about Jesus, and they even know, you know, the Good Shepherd and so on and so forth. It's very hard sometimes because you reach a point, and this is my theory, as in Catholicism, I'm Orthodox, raised in the Orthodox faith, and in other religions, it's religion.
Right.
You're following a path. And this church says this, or this temple, you know, we're following the law, the 613 laws, and we're atoning, we're doing this and that. We have the same thing in the Christian faith. We're Catholics, Orthodox are very, very strict, very similar. The way it's less worship, it's less following, it's more ritual. And I have trouble with them because they say, well, today is this and today is that, I have to do this, I have to do that. And I'll open up to them a little bit about, I think in what I'm saying is a lot of times Christians do take for granted following certain laws or certain traditions, especially in the sometimes the Protestants, or we're saved by the grace, the blood of Jesus Christ, God came with the only Son, blank, 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 saved through faith, so on and so forth, as our salvation is taken care of. But that is, to me, sometimes some of the problems of Christianity, because we look at it like we got to get out of jail card. And at times, I think sometimes with the Jews, they're much more responsible at times to their past, but it also can be a link to not going to the future, because in the law, Paul did it with the Galatians, you're going back and eating dietary food, you're this and that, and yet I have a problem sometimes. I can see where that could be important in following, but in a sense, you're also handcuffing yourself to an older tradition. As Christians, we're taught to free ourselves from that. But at the same token, I think it also, this week the Pope came, and it reminds us all about being Christian, whether it be Catholic or whatever. And the same with the Jews. I think they have such a strong tradition, you know, that I think the same with Catholicism and everything else. Say, what are you? I'm a Catholic. Well, no, you're a Christian, and you're a follower of Jesus Christ. And I think in a way that there's kind of a handicap. So when I speak to my friends that are Jewish, I sort of go to a certain point, and then they say, well, you know, the law. And I think there's still, some of them are still trapped in that, just like a Republican, a Democrat, or a conservative, or a liberal. I think we're trapped in those etchings of what we are as human beings and what we were taught.
Right. And
there was a period where the Jews were taught and then forgot about it. And then a lot now at these yeshivas and everything, they're taught and continue this tradition. But I think it's very hard sometimes, like I said, I don't know how you do. I try to easily work my way in, but there's a limit sometimes, and they'll say, yeah, that's great, and we just want to know a little bit about the fella. And I said, well, it's more than that. It's God. I am Yahweh. And he says that several thousand times in John, that I am who I am. I am the way, the truth, and the life. But it's hard to explain that because it's also been announced earlier in Scripture, through Isaiah and all this, that this is what's going to happen, and it happened. And I say, for all these scholars that study the Torah and study all this, that, did you read Isaiah? It's there. But again, we're following what we were told, and there's a certain blindness to all of us, even in the Christian faith. And like I said, even in Catholicism, we're doing the dogmas, we're following all this tradition, that sometimes people won't let go of those things. We have it even in this, I was a Catholic, or I'm a Orthodox, I don't want to let it go. But it's there, and you have to, even for Jews, you have to let go of that past. I did it, and it's very hard. So just to say, to leave the Orthodox faith and come to this church, there was a lot of stuff left behind.
Sure.
To open your heart.
Yeah. Well, Jeremiah talks about the law being written on our hearts,
Yeah.
and I think that there's a freedom there, but there's also a freedom if you want to worship in a certain way, and that's what God is leading you to do. And I have friends that I have a friend who actually became Catholic from he went to an evangelical church in the South, and he just found it was so what you were talking about, so freeing, that he felt like, wow, I'd like a little bit more authority here in the church, and so he ended up moving in that direction. I personally didn't agree with him, but that's what he chose to do. So I realized, there's going to be, we're a spectrum, right? So there's lots of different denominations. Some of it's bad, like the way things have split and bifurcated, but at the same time, God also has it's unique as well in each culture and each time. To see what God is doing in the body of Christ at large. So, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Let's take a little break here. If you need to get going, you're welcome to go. We have a table here of information. He'll stay. You can ask more questions, but if you need to get going, you can. There's also a little bucket here if you want to give an offering to Jews for Jews.